It's so great to be live with you today and have so many of you join. It's so good to have you here. Okay, I'm excited for today's event. We are going to be talking all about something a bit different. We're looking at how to deal with rejection, and specifically interview rejection, and especially when you have any career setbacks. And we have to face rejection at some point in our lives. It happens frequently. And especially when we are putting ourselves out there, we're applying for roles, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. So that's what we're talking about today. I'm just going to make sure you can hear me. Everything is set up. I'm also on YouTube and on LinkedIn. So, hi, please comment and introduce yourself. It's always good to have the interaction, and I love seeing you here and answering your questions. So if you have any, let me know. It's good to be here. Okay, perfect. I'm being told that everything is smooth. So welcome. Hopefully we won't have any, fingers crossed, any electrical or technical problems. And yeah, cool. So as I was saying, we're looking at all about how to handle, especially interview rejection. Now, I speak with professionals from all over the world, and even yesterday I had a conversation with one of the members in my community who told me in the last year I've had rejections from 5 different companies. And most of the time, they tell me it's because of their English level. Of course, there's other reasons too. But my inbox is filled with messages like this saying, I'm losing many opportunities. I didn't get the job I wanted. I've been waiting to hear back and I haven't heard anything. Or I'm not 100% confident about having an interview in English, so I just don't even want to try because I'm too scared of rejection. Okay, Bruna, great to see you. Thank you for telling me that it's all okay. I'm so glad, and I'm glad to have you here. I hope you're having a good afternoon. I know Bruna is in Brazil, so wonderful. It's so good to have you here. And when we get messages like this, or when you are getting rejected, I should say, and sometimes it's not even a rejection. Sometimes you are ghosted from companies. You just don't hear anything. And we have this saying of no news is good news. But when it comes to interviews, you're not hearing back. It's usually bad news. And it can take an emotional toll. It's difficult to handle rejection. Getting rejection is hard. And especially if it's happening again and again. Even the most resilient will feel bad about it. But have you been there? Have you experienced that before? If you have been dealing with no's or rejections recently, know that 1, you're not alone. It happens. But what I've really seen is there's 2 ways that people might handle it. And I've kind of touched on it. But 1 is this instinct or feeling of just keep going. I don't want to stop. And that's probably my natural reaction is I'm just determined, I'm going to keep going, keep interviewing, and I won't stop until they say yes. That's definitely me. And the second one is that you just completely give up. You feel stuck and you just don't want to keep moving forward. And I see both happening. And there are problems with both reactions, actually. And the reason why it's a problem of this keep going is even the most determined can start to lose hope. And we start to feel almost ashamed or embarrassed when we're rejected, especially from interviews or opportunities and setbacks in our career. And we might even want to deny that it's affecting us so much, and we just keep going anyway. And the energy there is that we start to almost become, the energy's feeling is kind of desperate, even if you don't want to kind of have that impression. So it can just affect affect us and impact us, and we just keep going anyway. And especially, you've done a lot of preparation, you've applied for multiple roles, and you really wanted that. And you can be confused why you're being rejected. I know that has happened to me. You start to question everything, and you might question yourself, your abilities, and that can lead to blame. And you blame yourself, you might even blame others, and you might say something like, oh, in the interview, I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I answered this question in the wrong way, or maybe I don't have enough experience. Maybe my portfolio isn't good enough. Maybe my English isn't good enough. Maybe I should have done something different. And we can start to blame ourselves. Now, it's not to say that we shouldn't look back and see how we can improve on our performance, but it gets dangerous when we start to blame ourselves. We want to know why we were rejected. It can spiral really into this blame. And we do that because we naturally want to protect ourselves from any future rejection, right? Has anyone been there? If anyone is here, let me know if that has happened to you. And I have an episode I can recommend all about sabotaging your success. And it's about speaking with positivity, because the language that we use leaves a very powerful impression. And sometimes it's not to do with even our level of English, it's not to do with our portfolio, it's not to do with our qualifications, it's to do with how the impression that we leave, especially in an interview. And we express ourselves perhaps using positive language, but with the tone that's quite negative. Or it can be that we're using negative language without really realizing it. And it may misconstrue our message. And you may be that, I've definitely been there, so I'm really speaking from experience. This has happened to me more than once. I followed all the steps for the interview. The company were very interested in working with me and having me work with them. And I ticked the boxes. Okay, I thought this is, maybe a little bit too relaxed. This is going to be easy. And I had this interview. This is quite a few years ago now, I would say around 9 or 10 years ago. And I had this interview, and I was answering the questions. Everything seemed to be going fine. And the interesting thing with this particular interview is that it was recorded, and I was able to watch the recording. And I didn't watch the recording right away. I felt pretty confident. And then after, I was rejected, and I started to go into this, but why? Like, what did I do? Why was I rejected? And ultimately, it was because of, I watched the playback, I watched the interview. It wasn't what I said, it was how I came across and the language, the positive language I used. So I would be confident in what I was saying, and then I would backtrack. So it'd be like, I guess. Yeah, I think so. And just questioning. And it was only very subtle. And it was that I think ultimately, of course, is that hesitation. And that was one thing. So I do have a recommendation that is an episode of the podcast that I have, the Design of Communication. I will share the link because that is a totally different thing. But that was one reason. And you start to question, well, what is it? What is it that I was doing in the interview? Okay, we got a few people commenting. Hi, Brenda. I've been ghosted so many times the last month that I started to believe that I'm the problem. That's it. That's exactly it. And then when it happens again and again, firstly, it's really looking into that, but being careful, because it can go into this spiral of blame. And that's what happened to me before in my situation. I've definitely been there. So, okay, Clara said it's about empowering yourself. It sure is. Yeah, we will be looking at the steps and what you can do when you're in this situation. I have delayed applying for jobs for fear of rejection. Not really fear, but not wanting to end up in a rejection chain. Yeah, that's it. And I think once you get into that first rejection, that's when you start to question. So the first rejection, like for me, was okay, maybe it was me. Maybe, yes, it was the language I used, but maybe I wasn't cut out for it altogether. And maybe that's where it gets really dangerous. So I understand exactly what you mean by this rejection chain, Juliana or Juliana. Okay, Clara, if you get rejected. Yeah, okay, good question. And we have questions coming. I will answer that. I think this is a really important question. I'm going to bring it up. I will be going into this, but I think that's a really good question. If you get rejected, is it good practice to ask for feedback to the recruiter? Yes. So I will quickly answer that, but I think as we go through, I will be able to expand a little bit more. I would say yes, it is good practice to ask for feedback. Now, some of the feedback that you will get from some companies is much better than others. And it's not, it's very nice of the company to be able to give you feedback, or the recruiter to give you feedback, but that doesn't always happen. So I think it's worth asking and getting feedback, but that feedback you're not always guaranteed to get the feedback from a recruiter. And secondly, the feedback that you get might not be very personalized. And that's why I think from who was it, Clara said about it's empowering yourself. So this is the same really with any kind of feedback, if not just in jobs. It's, yes, I always think it's important to ask, always seek out feedback. But sometimes the feedback that we get isn't always very helpful, or it just depends. It might not be as tailored, and it's not always up to the recruiter to give you feedback. It's not, especially if you think about how many people are applying to these positions. Unfortunately, I guess it depends on the stage of where you're being rejected as well. So that's a really good question. And if you have questions, please keep them coming. I realize I haven't introduced myself, and I know some of you know me quite well. Some of you maybe not so much. So my name is Gemma. The pronunciation is Gemma, although I'm called Hema or Gamma, lots of different ways of pronouncing my name. I'm fine with any of them, but it's Gemma technically. And I am from the south of England, and I'm currently living in Mexico. So right now it's 1:15 in the afternoon. And I've been living and working abroad. And I realized it's quite different. I was born and raised on the Isle of Wight, which is in the south of England, very different to where I am now. And since working with professionals and colleagues from many different countries, and also interviewing, I've worked with companies where I've been on both sides. I've been interviewing and being interviewed myself. And there are a lot of challenges that come with that, especially when it's with global teams and an international setting. And I currently help specifically design, tech, and creative professionals. And I've helped professionals from more than, I think, 25 different countries. And I always get asked, why did you get into this? What is the big reason? And it's especially because I found those who work in the creative industry, I would say, in design and tech, typically they are, as a creative, you're very incredible at what you do, but it's that ability to articulate your ideas with confidence, clarity, and defend your ideas and really get the buy-in and connect with colleagues. And it doesn't matter what language you speak, or the experience that you have. That's what I see sometimes is holding people back, is that holding yourself back, but also your ability to articulate your ideas and build those relationships. And when you don't have that, it can hold you back from opportunities or being recognized and reaching your full potential. So those are the people that I typically help, and I'm really excited to be here to share this with you today. So, full disclosure, a lot of the concepts that I'm sharing with you have come from a book that I've read. No, I will share the book with you. It's The Gap and the Gain. And it's called The Gap and the Gain, The High Achiever's Guide to Happiness, Confidence, and Success by Dan Sullivan, and it has Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Now, it's highly recommended, but a lot of the concepts that have come from this, I have seen them specifically in working with those in creative spaces. And I think a big part of that is those who are in the creative space, who are not just in the creative space, but in the technical, it's that constant looking for feedback, always looking for improvement. Typically, that perfectionism comes in. So I think it's why it's even more, it applies to everyone, but it's something that I've really noticed working with these specific types of creatives. And that's why I really wanted to go through this, especially with you today, because I've seen, as I mentioned, I get messages all the time, I'm being rejected, or just like Brenda said, I'm being ghosted, which is the worst, really. It's how we handle that. And like Clara said, it's about empowering yourself for sure. So firstly, I really want to go into, well, what are the steps? And the number one thing is what I've already touched on, is to acknowledge that it is difficult. It is hard. It's easy for your confidence to take a hit. And I think step one is really to acknowledge that rejection is difficult, and how can we stop it, that we don't go into this spiral or this rejection chain? And a big thing that you can do is, especially once you've just been rejected or you're in this kind of feeling, this mindset, is to take 5 minutes and acknowledge that it's been tough, process everything, and just accept that, and give your time to really let your feelings exist and be processed. But the key is not to stay there too long. I think that's where there can be issues, is like Juliana said, it's that rejection chain, and it can last for a long time. So it's acknowledging that, and then we need to change how we measure ourselves and our successes moving forward. So that's really the first thing, is just take 5 minutes, and I wouldn't take too long with this. I think it really depends on how big the career setbacks and rejections are. Maybe if you've been in that space for a long time, maybe you need to take a day. Maybe you need to take some time, to a little bit longer than 5 minutes. But I would say, don't keep it too long, and time yourself ideally. So 5-10 minutes is what I would recommend. So that's the first step. I'm just going to take some water. So let me know if you have any questions as we go through. But that's really the first thing. And next, you really want to think, well, how can you define and measure your success, specifically when it comes to your career and interviewing? What is success to you? And we tend to look at how many rejections we've had. We remember it. So I said yesterday, I had this conversation actually with one of my Fluent Club members, and he told me, I've had 5 rejections in the last year, or maybe 2 years. He could tell me the exact number. I'm sure if I ask you, how many rejections have you had in your job, in your career within the last year, you would probably give me a number. I think it wouldn't be too difficult. Maybe you have to think a little bit, but you could come up with a number relatively quickly. And a big takeaway is really, if you're looking back, it's easy to look at those, what didn't go so well. But how many times could you say, I have, reached the step that I wanted to? It's probably something that you might not be measuring. And for me, I know when I first really, like I said, with that interview experience of being rejected, a big takeaway is I was constantly feeling, because I was like, okay, I haven't reached my goals. That must mean that I'm failing. And I wanted to be somewhere in the future that really wasn't possible. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't something that I could obtain. It was just impossible. So how do we change that? I think a big thing is to stop the comparison. So I as you come onto a platform, especially like LinkedIn, you will see many peers, many friends getting promotions, starting new jobs. And it's so easy to have this feeling inside. And it might just be for a split second of, what about me? What about me? Why didn't I get the promotion that I was hoping for? And why did I get rejected? There must be something wrong with me, right? And that's something we have to be very careful with, is we're comparing our goals, our criteria to someone else. And someone explained this as reading a book. You might be on chapter 4, they could be on chapter 23, and we're comparing our chapter 4 to their 23. So that's a big thing that I would like you to take away is that comparison that will come in. So an important step here is to specify what is success for me when it comes to interviews. And you have to be clear on what you want. And it could be, am I just applying for these jobs because I can? Am I applying for this because I think it's the right step for me? Well, maybe it's not really what I want. And this can absolutely apply to all areas of your life. So what is the criteria for you when searching for a new job or applying for a new job? Or perhaps if you are a freelancer in working with new clients and new projects. And getting clear on that is having a criteria that you set for yourself is one of the best things I could possibly share with you. And I have some examples for you. I like to give examples. And it could be that I want to apply for a job that must be 100% remote with flexible working options. That could be has to be that. Or it could be that I only truly want to work with a company that aligns with my values. It must align with what I believe in, whether that's personal or professional values and your goals. And it may be that you want to work for a company that has a fun company culture. That could also be it too. And these are just some examples. I would highly encourage you. Remember, it's all about your own. It's all about you. What is success for you, for your family? What does it mean to you? Okay. Let's have a look at your question. Okay. How many times to keep trying before you start questioning if you're aiming? Interesting question. How many times to keep trying before you start questioning? Well, it depends questioning for the right reason. If you're aiming for this, it is not right for you or not. I think that's why it's so important to set out the criteria. It's not that we should give up, but I think it's what is this criteria and really measuring it, which I will go into my next point and maybe come back to that a little bit. Any ideas anyone else would like to share? But I will definitely come back to it how many times. But I think if I explain the steps of what you can do, it will become a bit more apparent. Okay, Tanya. I believe we deserve a feedback session or email to check why the rejection happened. Yes, I'm so with you. I really think it's so important, especially when you're applying for a role, especially now. When you're applying for a role, typically there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. And when you're applying, you're not just applying and sending one application. Most of the time, you are tailoring that. You spend a lot of time going through the whole stages, the whole process. And the process of an interview, it really starts way before the interview itself. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it for you when you're applying. Then you have the interview itself. The first interview, you have, the introduction, the whole questions that you've prepared for. There's many steps in this interview process. So I'm 100% with you that yes, ideal situation is that you do deserve a feedback session or an email explaining why. But in many situations, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. I'm so with you, Tanya. And about the rejection, we have to learn about the meeting and be empowered to do our destiny. Yeah, it's exhausting. I don't think it will show all the message. I will read it. Okay. It's exhausting, but these things happen all the time. Maybe the reason was a specific technical thing or related to your English level. The key can be having this feedback. Yeah, it really can. But it's also how we take this feedback. And does that feedback, is it just a feeling? The feedback, for example, what I mean here is, I was going into that with my example, I was just assuming, and I think that's the problem, is yes, that's why it's so important to have feedback, but it's also taking that and what do we do with that feedback? How do we take that and improve ourselves? So really good points, Tanya. So going back to the steps of the whole process and what we can do, a big part of it is thinking, well, what does success specifically in interviews mean to me? And it's measuring from that experience. So like, I think, who else was it? Tanya said about the feedback, and Clara, yeah, about asking for feedback. Let's say we don't get any feedback, which happens. Hopefully you do. But let's say you aren't given any feedback whatsoever. You have to do that for yourself. And you have to do that by going through your criteria of what made this a successful interview for you. Of course, yes, the outcome is that you get the job. But being rejected, it's not just about that. It's how can we learn from this, like Tanya is saying, and move forward. So what have you learned from this experience? Let's say you've had multiple interviews, they were all unsuccessful. What have you learned from them? And it's really training your brain to see what was successful. What are the wins? It's all about that perspective and how you see it. Then they don't have to be huge wins, like, yes, you got the job. It can also be things like, how many jobs have you applied to? Let's say you applied to 3. Well, how many of those did you get to the first stage? So it's really measuring it from that way of, okay, I was successful in this part. I know for many, especially if you're a non-native English speaker, that first interview can be the most difficult. The technical side of the interviews, no problem. Of course, it depends, but typically this is what I see, is the first interview where you have to really set that first impression of talking about yourself, of being asked questions that you're not expecting, and preparing for those. So it would be really looking at the specific area. So I'm thinking about the actual interview itself, not thinking about, your portfolio, but the actual first interview. And it's the steps. So maybe, how did you introduce yourself? Was it how you made that connection with the person you were speaking to, that small talk? Was it how you expressed yourself? Was it the answers that you gave to these specific questions? Were you using a framework to express yourself in the best possible way, to answer the question in a way that they were expecting? And also in how you wrap up. So starting strong, ending stronger. That's just a few things that you can really look at of the actual interview itself, of reasons and areas that you might need to improve on. So if you don't get feedback, which, let's say you don't get feedback from the company, from the recruiter, we have to do this work a little bit ourselves. And that's why it's so important. It's doing it from a mindset of, it's not personal. It's like you were doing it for a friend. I think that's always helpful, is what could I say? For me, in my interview story that didn't go so well, I was able to finally get to this place of, okay, let's see what actually happened in this video, in this interview. And I went through to see what I was doing wrong. What also, the next point is what I was doing well, which working especially. So recently I've been doing a challenge, a video challenge for my members in my community. And I've noticed they find it very easy to talk about their weaknesses, what they can't do well, but recognizing their strengths is harder. It's naturally harder to do that. So what did you do well? What did you do well in the interview, and what didn't you do so well? So one thing I think is from this particular book as well that it argues is it's so important to be in this mindset of what can you take from this experience, from that interview, that you can utilize to be successful next time. And the book argues that being in this game mentality of, okay, I applied for 5 positions, that's a win. Just the whole process of applying for a job it's long. It takes a lot of energy. I should be, that's my success. Okay, secondly, how many interviews was I invited to? Okay, that's a success. That's a win. And you go through how many of the first stages? Well, I got through just one. Okay, but that's a win. And it's really recognizing the wins. And they argue, especially, that you will be more happier when you have this mindset of being in this game. And it will also make you more resilient to challenges and rejection. So the idea is to measure your tangible progress that has happened instead of the future. And I think that's why we get into this rejection chain, is looking ahead and not being able to get to where we want. So I want you to think of your life right now and share perhaps one area where you can focus on in your career or in an interview that you've had recently that has been the game for you. So let me know, what is something that has gone well in an interview or in your career? What has been going well for you? Okay, I want to go back to this question. I think this is a big question. How many times to keep trying before you start questioning if what you're aiming for is right for you or not? Well, I think it's important to do a lot of reflection for yourself because, like you said, it's what's for you or not. And sometimes we might have to go through of this checklist, this criteria that we set up for ourselves. And what have you measured to be success for you? And what is important to you? So I think I wouldn't be able to put a number on how many times to keep trying, because it might take some people 3 times to get the job that they wanted, or 300 times. I remember when for example, I left university and I spoke with a lot of people at the university about, career counselors, and they kept saying it will take 50 applications before you get your dream job. And because we just wanted a number, they were like, how many, what's the average? And they were like, it's going to take 50 times. Now, I don't necessarily think you need to apply to 50 positions. They didn't necessarily encourage that. And I know many it's about applying for what really is the next step for you based on your criteria. So yeah, I'll be interested to hear what other people think about this. I think it's an important point. But again, it's that comparison of it's about you. It's not how many times did it take someone else. It's what about you? What can you do? Are you comparing yourself to others' ideals, or is it your own? So that would be my biggest takeaway. Hopefully, Shreya, that makes sense. Okay. So to summarize the points, I like to always summarize and make it very clear for everyone, is it difficult? It is difficult to be rejected, and it can lead us to these false beliefs about ourselves, and acknowledge that it is difficult. It is difficult to be rejected. And we act like this, we go into this rejection chain because we want to protect ourselves. The way to get out of this is really, how do you define and measure your interview success? What is the step for you? And I always like to think, what is the one thing you can do? What is the one thing you can do right now? And not compare to others. So stop comparing to others, and that one thing that you can do. And I like to see the bigger picture, but also it's that right now. What is the one thing that you can do? And having that checklist. Then it's understanding being in the game, and it's really measuring, what have you learned from this experience? Yes, I've been rejected. Okay, I didn't get any feedback, unfortunately, from the recruiter, but what they told me was, from what I learned from that experience, I was able to really gather this information. The information is that the information that I was able to gather from my bad experience of an interview many years ago was I was using language that wasn't very, it wasn't very powerful. I didn't sound confident in my voice. And the next time I had an interview, I focused on just that one area. I was like, okay, that was the one area that really came across that I wasn't confident. I was using language like, I think, maybe, I was answering everything correctly, but I was going back on what I was saying. So that was the one area that I was able to see as feedback to myself, that I was then able to take that one area and improve on it. And that would be really my advice, is what is that one area? It could be like that example. It could be that it is your portfolio. It could be that you are not explaining your process. It could be your English language level. So it's going back and what is that one area that you can work on, that you can improve. So, okay. Oh, sorry, there was a glitch. Okay, great to have you. Okay, delayed reply due to technical glitch, for example, in terms of geography and language barrier. Okay, yeah. In terms of language barrier. I'm guessing you're referring to how many times to keep trying before you start. Okay. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the in terms of geography or language area, but you have to let me know. In the last interview I had, my portfolio cases weren't the best, but I passed the first stage. Oh, great. Because they liked my soft skills and the conversation we had. That was a win for me. Yeah, that's it. I love that. I love this thinking. I think that's how you improve, is just seeing it as you're learning. And sometimes the rejections that we get are helping us get closer to where we want to be. So that's a lot of the mindset. So I really love that, Juliana. In the last interview, my one of the best, I passed the first stage. Yeah, you clearly showed, like you said, your personality, the soft skills, the conversation, and they connected with you. And sometimes it really isn't about any of those skills that you have. Just like you said, the portfolio may not be there, but you might connect really well. And that could be on one of your goals. Your goal is to connect with the company. You could be offered something and actually it's not right for you. It doesn't fit those goals. So I love that. I'm so happy to hear that. It was a really cool experience. It was a great experience. And that's how you can really get out of this spiral, I would say. I love that so much. Yeah, so I would say if you do have any questions, or if you're in this space, just reach out to me, because I love hearing from you. I love supporting you. And if you do have an interview coming up and you would like to be supported by me and by others, especially if you're working in design and tech or in the creative space, please get in touch. I also would like to share that I have the Fluent Club, and the Fluent Club is currently closed. We're opening very soon, and it's a community of professionals who work in design and tech specifically. And they're from more than 15 different countries, maybe more. And it's a membership community that supports especially those professionals who are looking to develop the English language, and also the skills and communication skills to successfully work in an international environment, whether you have a job already in that environment or you would like to within the next 6 months or the next year. So our members are really seeing incredible results. So we have a few members here with us, so shout out to my Fluent Club members. But I just wanted to, that is an opportunity. I will just share the link. If you wanted your name on the wait list, it really is a great experience, community to be a part of and to be supported, especially if you have an interview coming up, or if you're in this spiral of just this chain of no's and you want to change that. But really, I would say, no matter how frustrated you are from feeling that you're not where you want to be, if you don't feel like you have the level of fluency, or you're just not happy with where you are in your career, you can move away from that. And especially if you're tired of this rejection, you can move away from that. And I hope the steps that I've shared today with you are helpful, that you've taken. Please share any takeaways and any points if you're watching the replay or you're here now. I would love to hear your takeaways and any other advice that you might have. But thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure having so many of you here and sharing. And it's not easy to share and asking great questions. If any of your questions haven't been answered, like I said, either in the chat or send me a direct message. It's always great to talk with you. But thank you, guys. It's been so wonderful to have you here. I should say guys and girls and everyone else. It's been so nice to go through this with you today, to get your interaction. And I will see you all very soon. Thank you so much. Bye.